Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Cliff Notes for, I believe this is lecture number 12, Prison Subculture. Some important things I want you guys to get out of this particular lecture is the idea that there is a culture that exists inside a prison. In 2020, obviously, this is something that's kind of a known fact because we've made so many movies and TV shows out of it. And the reality is that most people don't want to go to prison nowadays because they're very much afraid of that culture. Your average person thinks that if they go to prison, they're just going to be stabbed and raped the entire time, every single day. And, it's somewhat of a myth, but it's a myth that, it helps. It helps create greater deterrence in society. Overall, what I want you to get out of this is the idea of, first of all, culture. Culture in and of itself is, it's a body of customs. It's a body of traditions. It's a body of values. It's how we dress. It's how we talk. It's the norms that we create. Prison subculture, what I have at the end of the lecture, is the idea of how much of that culture spilled into mainstream culture. Sagging pants, neck tattoos, gang culture, stop snitching culture, stuff like that. Like, these are all byproducts of prison culture. And so I do, in the lecture notes, I want you to pay attention to kind of two different versions of that prison culture. The one by Donald Cressy from 1962, where he interviewed a whole bunch of inmates and kind of collectively put together a bunch of values that prisoners have. And the T.J. Granick list from 2000, which is just labeled as How to Survive in Prison. And kind of how prison culture has changed. Prison culture used to be about respecting the real con, respecting other inmates. And nowadays there's much more exploitation of those inmates, much more exploitation of older inmates. The reason there's an exploitation of older inmates, obviously, is because when you're old, you're more vulnerable, you're more frail, and therefore are an easier target. So, and also a byproduct of prison subculture. If you're a superintendent of a prison, so that the Create Your Own Prison assignment was kind of an exercise in you becoming a superintendent and trying to control the three major concerns inside of a prison. Prison violence, the drug trade, and the sex trade. All three of these things tend to be controlled by gangs. And gang culture is not in prison because it's a spillover from the streets. There's a lot of people that come into prison culture already being a part of gangs, but a lot of those gangs dissolve or merge with each other and are usually merged along racial lines. People join gang prisons because by the numbers, it's just safer. If you're a lone wolf, if you're a lone person inside of a prison, that's it makes you an easy target because people know that no one else is going to jump in to defend you. It's almost like bullying in middle school or high school. Like the bully who gets bored and wants to pick on people will pick on that kid that he knows nobody's going to defend. Let's go pick on Jimmy over there. Let's go get him. Let's go kick his ass and put him inside of a locker because the kid's by himself. People join gangs. People join religious groups. Nation of Islam, humongous in jails. Not because of its philosophy, but because of its protectionism. Because it provides a path for people to get their lives straight. And it also has numbers. So this, if you take a look at the gangs that I have in the lecture notes, note that these are prison gangs. And these are gangs that really don't exist outside of prisons. People join these gangs just to have strength by numbers. Black Guerrilla Family, Aryan Brotherhood. You might have somebody who's the most liberal, progressive-minded white person, anti-racist white person. They go to prison. They'll join the Aryan Brotherhood to survive so that they won't be killed later on. So this is a big part of this lecture is really just kind of focusing on the culture that exists within and the social controls that are created from the prisoners themselves. There's the superintendent. Again, the superintendent is a warden. There's the superintendent and what the superintendent can do with prison culture or controlling of prisoners. But then there's the actual prison culture itself, which has way more controls over the prison population. Again, just think about, I don't know, being high school kids and the little subculture that exists in high school that's not controlled by the principals and not controlled by the vice principals or the teachers. It's controlled by the students. It's led and driven by the students. And so please pay attention to that. I also included a video, a very short, super short video on women behind bars. I just kind of wanted to emphasize that, like, prison subculture is it's not just for men. That 7% of the prison population, women, is kind of equally as brutal, equally as violent. So generally speaking, I wanted to give you a little bit of window, and I'm also asking you in your discussion how you would survive in prison. Yes, you can make direct reference to that top 10 list, which is interesting because there is a larger criminological discussion about which came first, a chicken and egg discussion about street culture, street violence, and prison culture, which came first. But the reality is that they both feed each other right now. If you live in a very dangerous, high crime neighborhood, you could pretty much follow that exact same list in order to survive. No gambling, being careful how you pick your friends. Probably the only thing that doesn't necessarily apply is on that list is like keeping a good porn collection. Keeping a good porn collection in prison makes perfect sense because it kind of keeps you out of rotation for the sex trade, and it also it keeps you out of rotation for being exploited, sexually exploited, but also reduces sexual frustration, which can lead to violence, obviously. You could probably say the same thing about street culture, but people might engage in actual sex. And so that's, overall, that's what I want you guys to get out of this lecture. Again, please pay attention to Goffman's concept of the total institution and the spoiled identity, because of, and I mention that because the idea of once a person goes to prison, their identity is spoiled because a felon, a convicted felon, is somebody that is, we judge before we ever get to hear their story. Their identity is spoiled in that regard because they have that label of felon. But overall, just want to talk about those, the values and the norms that become a part of a person's prisonization, how they become accustomed to those norms. So overall, that is that. Hopefully all of you got your results back for your midterms. And I guess that's about it. I'll see you guys next week. Take care.